Well, the top 10 countries on the happiness index do have something in common. Their GDP per capita is 30 times higher than those countries on the bottom 10. So does that mean that money can buy happiness? Well, to find out, I'm joined by one of the editors of the report, John Helliwell. He's also Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of British Columbia. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
So help us understand, what's the correlation between a country's economic performance and its residents' happiness?
It's modest. So of the 6 factors we have that explain, perhaps I ought to remind your listeners that we don't put together an index based on other factors. We just ask people, 1,000 people a year, how they rank their lives as a whole on a scale from 10 as the best possible life and 0 as the worst possible life. And then we just average those scores over 3 years of surveys, and that provides the rankings. We then try and disentangle that to figure out what makes for a happy life in the happy countries. Turns out the happy ones, the top 10, all are high on all of the 6 variables, and income is only one, health is another, generosity is another, freedom is another, trust in good government is another, and most important of all, having people to count on in times of trouble.
It certainly seems like perception is a big part of whether or not people think that they're happy. So what were the biggest surprises that you saw in your findings?
Well, the biggest surprise this year, and I guess maybe it was only a surprise because we hadn't looked at it before, is that for the very first time we ranked countries by the happiness of their immigrants as well. And we found that looking across these huge differences among countries from up above 7.5 to down below 3, that the happiness of immigrants mimicked almost exactly the happiness of people born there. So it really means people who move from one country to another are very likely in the long run to be as happy as the other people who live there, which really means the structure of a society, how well people get along with each other, is very important. And it's contagious if you're there. If you're not there, then you have to learn how to do something similar where you live.
Now, it's interesting that countries with active conflicts or crises like Iraq and Venezuela ranked higher than countries like Georgia, which was actually the lowest ranked European country after Ukraine on the list. So how much weight is given to each factor that goes into this study?
Well, in some sense, we don't set the weights. We can figure out what we think the weights are by looking at people's answers who are in different kinds of circumstances. And so we know the social context is very important. We know income is modestly important, and that income differences are so huge between countries that it ends up explaining quite a bit of the difference between the very happy and the least happy. Conflict drives countries down, of course, but there's no fixed number for that because there's no fixed conflict.
Yeah, fair point. Now, we also saw that China has fallen on the list to number 86, but its economy has grown. What's the correlation and what's behind the drop, you think, that you saw on the list?
Well, you can drop either because your scores have gone down or because other people have risen faster than you. If we look from 2008 to 2010, starting point, ending point 2015 to 2017, in fact, China is one of the major gainers. It's 20th biggest gainer, significant gain over that period. So maybe down a bit from last year, but definitely up over that 6-year period.
Now, a country that we did see a drop on was Venezuela. So how much do economic crises impact overall happiness?
Well, one of the things we've learned is crises are bad if you're not handling them very well. So the economic crisis we looked at most intensively was the 2007-2008 crises. And we found that the countries like Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, where they weren't handling it very well, where they were sort of fighting with each other about how to deal with it, had huge drops in well-being, way more than you could predict on the basis of their unemployment and income drops, while some other countries like Iceland and Ireland, whose banking systems were torn apart even more so, skated through without any happiness loss. And that's because, in a way, they sort of faced up to the problem, dealt with it, and in some ways were happy with each other or proud of each other that they were able to face the problems together. So it's how you deal with an external shock that's more important for your happiness than whether there's a shock to deal with, and we have lots of evidence from earthquakes of the same sort.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, John Helliwell there, editor of the World Happiness Report for 2018.